I bring greetings on behalf of UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, and thank you for this invitation to participate in this important summit hosted by the Hong Kong Federation of Women Lawyers and the Center for Comparative and Public Law, Faculty of Law, University of Hong Kong. We share a common interest and purpose between our agencies, that of ensuring women's voices, experiences, and needs shape international and national laws and policies to end all forms of discrimination against women. Indeed, the legal system, and you who work within it at all levels, have a particular responsibility for ensuring state accountability. Keeping a close watch over the content of the law and the workings of the administration of justice, as advocates, as legal practitioners, as academics, and policymakers, you can promote compliance with human rights norms and standards. And because so many of you provide services to the most excluded, your work is also vital for women's access to justice and for strengthening the rule of law. In this conference, the organizers have taken on a singularly challenging issue. While it is difficult, if not impossible, to know accurately the dimensions of trafficking of women, given its diffuse and hidden nature, we can all appreciate that trafficking is widespread violation of human rights, and like other forms of violence against women, it is underreported and its perpetration is marked by impunity. When we think of trafficking in the women's movement, we often think of sex trafficking, but other forms of trafficking, such as labor trafficking, and now trafficking of persons for organs, are growing features of a pernicious globalization. Here are some facts for the Asia-Pacific region. Trafficking is a transnational organized crime of global reach. It ranked for the world's second largest criminal industry after the trade in illicit drugs. Women account for 55 to 60% of all trafficking victims detected globally, and women and girls together account for about 75%. 27% of all victims detected globally are children. Of every 3 child victims, 2 are girls and 1 is a boy. In the Asia region, 39% of the victims are children. Trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation accounts for 58% of all trafficking cases detected globally, and for 44% in Asia and the Pacific region. The number of convictions for trafficking in persons is in general very, very low. So trafficking in women and girls, in particular for sexual violence and exploitation, has been addressed in human rights treaties consistently over the last 30 years. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW Convention, considers sex trafficking a form of sex discrimination and indeed, of course, a human rights violation. 14 member states from Asia and the Pacific have ratified the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children. And in the Asia-Pacific region, there are several multilateral agreements addressing trafficking, with particular attention paid to preventing and combating trafficking in women and children. At national level in our region, at least 9 countries have laws on trafficking. Yet, the scourge of trafficking continues, indeed thrives, notwithstanding the development of international and national laws and policies. Our efforts seem puny in the light of the stories of women, mostly youth, speaking to the unbearable horrors visited upon them. They are cut adrift from families, isolated, live under constant mental, physical, and sexual threat, and are at a greater risk of contracting sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV. Their reproductive and sexual health and rights are completely compromised. Like other forms of violence against women, we need to analyze and respond to the failures of public policy making and implementation of laws and policies. We need to consistently and constantly articulate that effective responses must address the structural factors: gender inequality, poverty, unemployment, state actor corruption where that exists, lack of access to fair and timely justice systems, and indeed globalization. We know that those most at risk for trafficking are the poorest, those who lack access to educational and economic opportunities. And gender inequality exacerbates women's vulnerabilities, as so many are trapped in the informal economy, including as unpaid family workers and without labor or social protection. It's this economic need, indeed desperation, which is also associated with their burden of care, leads women to take risks associated with undocumented migration, and then many are caught involuntarily and trafficked into sex work. We are also living in a world where, despite our achievements in eliminating discrimination, the culture of gender inequality persists. In a recent study done on men's perpetration of violence against women in 5 countries in Asia and the Pacific, we get important insights that reveal the depth of the challenge that we confront in transforming patriarchy. In the Partners for Prevention study, men who have perpetrated violence against women say that for the most part they feel no guilt, they feel no remorse for sexual and physical assaults. Indeed, these assaults are motivated by a sense of masculine sexual entitlement and by an assertion of power and control over women's bodies. In our focus on sex trafficking, we ought not to lose sight of the increasing numbers of women and girls who are also harmed by forced labor and debt bondage, coerced in particular into domestic work. This form of labor exploitation is commonplace and exacerbated by the workings of a gendered political economy that devalues women's worth, devalues women's work, while exploiting their economic need. Recently, on October 11th, we commemorated the International Day of the Girl Child. On that day, we reaffirmed that girl children have equal rights to the full range of human rights. Yet for too many, this is still merely aspirational. It is estimated, for example, that 67% of all child domestic workers are girls. This exploitation will have negative multiplier effects over their lifespan, denied as they are education, training, protection, security, and most importantly, love. The causes and consequences of trafficking are the result of a complex interplay of structural factors, mostly social and economic exclusion and gender inequality. But we know what needs to be done, and this was reaffirmed at the 57th session of the Commission on the Status of Women in 2013, which called for 1. The strengthening of existing civil and criminal legislation with a view to strengthen the protection of the rights of women and girls. Secondly, the provision of appropriate protection and care. Thirdly, the acceleration of public awareness, education and training to discourage the demand that fosters all forms of exploitation. And fourthly, the strengthening of the rule of law to ensure the end of impunity. The efforts to eliminate trafficking must be founded on a rigorous enforcement by the criminal justice system, sound migration policy, and a firm regulation of the labour markets. But we must also change culture by addressing the factors that enable men to assert power and control over women, some men to assert power and control over women without consequences, namely gender inequality and discrimination. The centrality of gender inequality to global development, peace and security is now widely understood. In its report, the high-level panel on post-2015 called for transformational shifts in which no one is left behind. Key to that is addressing the vulnerabilities of women and girls to exploitation, discrimination, and violence. As we move forward to shaping the post-2015 agenda, UN Women calls on your support in ensuring that global commitments are reaffirmed and reinforced, and that these are implemented effectively at the national level. In this regard, UN Women considers, firstly, that we need to work together to expand women's choices and capabilities so that they have options about how they lead their lives. Secondly, we must stop violence against women. And thirdly, state and non-state actors alike must ensure that women take full part in public and private decision making. In other words, women need voice, women need choice, women need safety. To end trafficking, we must, without rage, say enough. We must marshal political will to speak out against social exclusion and gender inequality. We need to build partnerships, including especially with men and boys, asking them to join in solidarity for an enlargement of women's freedoms and rights, and the elimination of gender stereotypes, which indeed also restricts men's choices. Institutions such as yours can play an important and critical role. In fact, you have been doing that, holding governments to account for the development and effective implementation of laws and policies and practices to end all forms of discrimination. So I wish you a productive dialogue today and assure you of UN Women's commitment to join you in this work and to strengthen our partnerships. Thank you very much for this opportunity to engage with you.